Good evening, everybody. And as I say, welcome to what is our third end of semester panel event with creative and professional writing here at the University of Wolverhampton. Couple of housekeeping things first before I forget. This event is being recorded, so you'll be able to access this and listen to it or listen back to it at your own leisure. And also just to remind you that Zoom is, of course, a public platform. So please do not share any confidential or private information. And we will be using the chat box and also the Q&A facility as well. So if there are questions that you would like to pose to our very special guest waiting in the wings here, please do so. We will, of course, leave time for questions at the end as well. Okay, so as I say, an end of semester panel event, and this is what happens when us lecturers all come together towards the end of term with a special guest to talk about something that we've either been exploring across our modules or something that we feel has challenged us. And since COVID continues to rear its ugly head in all its different guises, we thought we'd turn our attentions and have a chat about well-being, and in particular the importance of creativity to our sense of well-being. Perhaps less so when submission deadlines are all looming and assignments are due, but perhaps actually this will be the perfect session to give you some ideas of how to cope with all that stress. But also, I suppose, really, as writers and all our guises do really take much comfort and solace in our work. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Lisa Blower. I'm a senior lecturer and the course leader here at for the Creative and Professional Writing Department. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Charlie Barnes and Dr. Ines Goria-Labata, and our very special guest. It's with absolute pleasure to see the wonderful Deborah Alma. You're a poet, Deb, aren't you? You're an editor, you're a lecturer, you're a workshop facilitator. As the emergency poet, which obviously we're going to talk about, you prescribed poetry from your vintage ambulance for 8 years, was it? 8 years?
Longer, about 9 or 10 years, I think.
Parked it up. You've also worked for years as a writer in the community. You're a very experienced workshop facilitator. You use poetry as a form of communication, don't you, really, with, and I know most notably you've worked with people with dementia and in palliative care, but also for well-being, which, you know, we're the focus of this discussion at night, and also because you're coming to us live from the world's first walk-in poetry pharmacy. It's also, we should also mention that you're the editor of the Emergency Poet and Anti-Stress Anthology. You've also done the hashtag #MeToo anthology, which was rallying against sexual harassment. You've also edited These Are the Hands, which was posed from the heart of the NHS, which I know Michael Rosen contributed to. So you're nothing but just a tour de force, aren't you, really, in terms of what you champion and advocate and celebrate. It's just lovely to have you, Deb. It really is. So thank you very much. So I'm going to ask the first question. And my first question is let's begin with the emergency poet, because that's obviously how I first met you on the festival circuit with your wonderful vintage ambulance. And for those of you who haven't come across you or didn't have the pleasure of a consultation and receiving a poem settlement, how did this all come about?
Hello, Lisa. Thank you so much for that kind of over-the-top introduction.
Oh, not at all. I mean, you know, it's just amazing, really. When I look at what you've done, I was trying to condense your biography, and then I thought, oh God, no, I've got to say all this stuff, because you have really just been magnificent in what you've been doing.
It sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And it sounds like, you know, I kind of know what I'm doing, but I've kind of done that, and then I do that, and then I do that. And it's the kind of life of a writer in the community, a jobbing writer, and then, you know, just trying things out and doing it all. And I think we all, all of us here probably have got some elements of that, haven't we?
Yes,
and so, and no wonder I'm exhausted. I mean, it was exhausting listening to that as well. So how did it start? Well, I did my creative writing degree and then an MA in my 40s, so really late, came back to it late, and was working with people with dementia, using poetry to assist communication. And I guess that's where most of the work I do now came directly from that. And in that process of working with people with dementia in care homes, I learnt how poetry can be a really intimate place of connection from one human, either the poet to the reader, or sharing a poem with somebody and introducing them to some poetry, and how it can have a profound effect on their mood, how it can change their mood in quite a significant way. And the other thing I learned doing that was about listening really carefully. So I'd sit alongside somebody with dementia, and either we'd make poems from their words, kind of found poems, which I'd then share back with them, and it was their own work, or in a group share poems with people. And watching that, and then I was at the end of a really awful relationship and was looking on eBay to buy I didn't have any money actually, but I was going to buy a camper van, and I saw an ambulance for sale, 1950s ambulance, and I just suddenly thought, oh, I could be an emergency poet, as you do. And all my friends, I was doing it on Facebook, were going, no, Deb, don't do it. And so it was so successful that I was able to give up my normal job, and I should probably explain what it is as well. Or do you want to explain it?
Well, no, absolutely no. I mean, tell us. It's one thing like looking on eBay for a vintage ambulance, but then this idea of going, I could be an emergency poet. I mean, where did this idea come from? I mean, I always think it's just me with harebrained ideas of what to do. And
it's not harebrained, it's perfectly sensible.
No, it's perfectly, but it was so wonderful at the same time. Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's something in me. I think coming out of a relationship where something was painful, I wanted to do something. When you've experienced a lot of pain, it kind of can make you braver somehow, because your kind of feelings all your other feelings are numb. I can't explain it, but I decided to turn that horrible, difficult thing into something positive and kind of joyful. It was good to have my mind in another thing, and this project that was too big for me, really. I think I was a single parent at the time. I didn't have any money, and so I painted emergency poet on the side of it, dressed up as a doctor, and had nurse first with me. And the idea of it is that people were invited into the back of the ambulance at festivals and schools, libraries, and then it ended up conferences and all over the place. But people would come in and lie down and on a stretcher in the back of the ambulance, and I'd ask them questions quite similar to the ones I was asking people with dementia, about how and when you're at your best, positive questions to take people into a kind of idealized state almost. And then at the end of it, I find them a poem, an appropriate poem, and share it with them. They're not my poems, they're well-known poetry, and explain to them why I've chosen it. I don't read it to them there and then. I say, go away and sit with a glass of wine or sit with a cup of tea in the garden, and then it was a bit of an experiment, but it worked somehow or other. People loved being listened to, they liked the whole process, and then the book came from that, because there was a little BBC film. The weird thing is, it doesn't look like it, but in one respect, all of us as writers, I think, have a kind of private writerly self, don't we? And then we have this other kind of self that needs to communicate with people. So to have all that media attention is quite difficult, actually. You know, I didn't mind them looking at the ambulance, but don't look at me.
Yes.
Which is funny.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's a lot to do with when you have a concept or you have some success. There is this need, I think, now for people to know about the person behind it. Do you know what I mean? And it's almost like the story that sells the story, and it almost distracts, doesn't it, from what we're trying to do as writers. It's, which is actually hide ourselves behind our words.
Or an ambulance.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, but the one thing that really strikes me about what you were doing as the emergency poet was just your extreme knowledge of poetry. I mean, do you know what I mean? To actually be able to select poems that you felt were going to be useful to people. I am a poet, and I used to work for a publisher years ago, and I've read poetry all my life, and I think I've got a terrible memory, but I've got this odd reference book that I use to find them, and so I don't think I've got an extreme. When I was putting the poems together, I have about 200 or 300 poems printed as prescriptions that I would take with me in the ambulance. So I knew those really intimately. And then I was always on the lookout for other poems. But I don't ever feel that I'm a kind of expert in that way. But I think everybody believes that their taste is good, don't they? And so I think I stand by the poems as good quality poems. They're intelligent, but they are also accessible. They have to be for the bloke who comes into the ambulance off the street who doesn't normally read poetry. And I kind of think this is a terrible pun, that's the driver behind all of the work that I've done, is to be a kind of bridge between that often poncy world of poetry that we're put off at school, quite a lot of us, and a bridge between that and saying, actually, this art form has got something in there for you, is bound to have, and to try and help people find the right stuff.
Can I jump in with what might be a bit of a nosy question? Like you're going to say no, but I wonder, like, obviously you've kind of referenced this huge bank of poetry that you had at your disposal, kind of for any given prescription, as it were. Did you find, or do you find, that you are prescribing things that at one time or another have helped you? Like, do you have quite a personal connection to the pieces as much as a professional one?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Charlie, actually. I think a lot of I love all of the poems. I stand by all of them. There are some actually I quite like Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver's quite often given to people. You do, but some of them I don't like, but I think one of the things I do is ask people about their reading habits, so I get a sense of their reading. So not all of the poems are ones that I absolutely love, but I think that there's all the message or the truth in the poem is a good one. But there are loads of the poems. I think it's true of therapists, isn't it, that they go into therapy because they're looking for something that they need. And there's no doubt that when I'm talking to people, I'm also listening and thinking, I need to do more of that. I need to take the advice of Seamus Heaney and go out into the countryside and stand by the sea, or whatever it is. And there's one, I'm just gabbling here. There's one poem by Derek Walcott called Love After Love. I don't know if anyone knows that poem. And it's the poem I prescribe to somebody if they've got a broken heart. It's a really wise poem. And of course, when I had a broken heart, it actually helped me. I stuck it on the fridge and thought, I need to do that work. I need to, to get over it in this way. And it worked. It did work. And so I can sort of honestly say to people, this medicine will cure you, you know, if you follow it.
And I mean, Ines, if I just kind of bring you in here, because you obviously teach on our life writing module, where we are actually using the self as subject, aren't we? And we're exploring the self in all its flaws and, you know, everything that perhaps sometimes we don't want to have a dialogue with. But yet it's kind of necessary, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is very interesting. I mean, from my own point of view, I mean, I've read the life writing pieces about things that I found, like memories that I found really charged and disturbing, but I wanted to explore nonetheless. And after writing a piece, you know, and working on it, it's just, I enjoyed the piece for what it was, but I also, you know, those memories stopped being as charged in my mind. So it was strangely therapeutical in a strange way. I was not writing as therapy, but like, there is something going on there. And what I wanted to ask you is if you could give any advice for my students. I have a few of them here, I can see, because I know some of them really want to explore those kind of like more difficult, some difficult memories or some stuff like that. And they're keen on exploring that. But at the same time, you have any advice on like, kind of like, I don't know, like protecting your own mental well-being and kind of like being kind to yourself in the process?
Yeah, that's it. That's a really good question. I think there's nothing like creative writing departments, is there, for getting you end up knowing each other really intimately, because you're talking about yourself in such intimate ways. And so it has to, I guess the thing that it has in common maybe is that you have to create a really safe space, don't you, in your writing group, or I have to create a safe space in the ambulance. It has to feel bounded in some way with kind of rules of confidentiality and care as well. But I really think, I mean, lots of us as writers write to explore ourselves or to explore something difficult in ourselves, and I think generally speaking we're brave people because we quite often go into those dark and difficult places. And I also believe really that it's really good for you to do that, and by telling the story, by making it a story, you put it over there and there's some kind of resolution in that, and it becomes further away from the experience. It's less of a trauma, because you can do it safely.
And I mean, I know you've done a lot of work, Deb, with, you know, as you were talking about before, with dementia patients and patients at end of life. And it is about this idea of communication, isn't it? But I mean, the therapeutic properties of creativity, this idea of being able to create and construct and craft. I mean, do you think there is, I mean, you've been doing this, you know, as a workshop facilitator, but I mean, there are no kind of there's no medical framework, is there, for creative writing as a therapy? But I have a real belief that it is. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely believe that as well. And I think, again, one of the things that I think that the ambulance and then the poetry pharmacy has and writing have in common is to hold both the playful part of yourself and a more serious part of yourself, and find they can appear slightly dissonant, can't they? The playful, the childlike playful quality, and then these moments of great import, I suppose, and then bringing them together in writing, or for me, listening to somebody or facilitating somebody else to write is magic, you know. And that's a great scientific term, isn't it? I think we do that really well, don't we? And I think to allow that creative, playful part to be in touch with that child's self is really healthy.
I mean, it's you know, we've gone through what I've lost track now, 3 lockdowns. Are we heading for a fourth? And, you know, I think we forget how many people turn to the arts to get them through, who turn to literature, or maybe they were just binging box sets, and, you know, but I mean, this is the point is it all begins with a writer, doesn't it? You know, a writer has been involved somewhere. It's all began with a word initially. I mean, there clearly is there's more to it, isn't there, than the relationship that we have with words and the relationship that we have with poetry in particular, and perhaps more so than with a novel. And I wonder why that is, because, you know, I don't think I would make a name for myself as the emergency novelist. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I think, you know, they'd be there for days whilst I read to them. But the convenience of a poem, you know, that in its brevity, but the fact that it packs this punch as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a little bite-sized thing, and that's why it's so easy for me to give as a gift to somebody as well, you know. And yeah, and quite often, I mean, you know, the sonnet form is the kind of perfect little kind of condensed short story, isn't it? You know, the whole kind of narrative arc and the turn and then a resolution. And I think lots of poetry does that really quickly and beautifully. And yeah, it's just ready to hand over and share. Yeah, it's great.
It always feels a little bit to me like that's actually the point of poetry. I realise that I'm kind of like boiling it down to its most basic form, but what I try and do when I'm writing a novel, which is to spread out the feeling as much as possible, feels very much the exact opposite to what I try and do when I'm writing a poem. And I once remember someone giving me really, really good advice in that respect, wherein for a novel, every paragraph has to do something, or every chapter has to do something, but for a poem it's every word, because you don't have the space enough to be frivolous with your time and with your feeling. And I wonder whether some of that is kind of observable in your practice, Deb, in so far as, you know, if you have this feeling, I can apply this feeling and I can do it in 14 lines, or I could do it in 17 lines, or, you know, whatever it is that you're prescribing to people.
I mean, I don't know how you write a novel. It's extraordinary. That, you know,
I don't.
Yeah, a poem's really easy, and then you can go out.
Yes, have a social life. Yeah.
Admiration for you.
But I mean, it's all a bit of a question of balance, though, isn't it? I mean, we were kind of talking about this in the wings before we came on, and this idea of, you know, we're using our creative practice almost for our own well-being, and then we're passing on our creative practice in order to inspire and teach and facilitate. And how do you balance all of this, Deb? Because I mean, you know, you manage more strands than anybody I know, really, I must admit.
That's mad. I don't think setting up a new business with, you know, largely single-handedly now, and all of the different things I do here is way too much for me, you know. So it comes at a cost. I mean, I love it, I absolutely love it, but it is like having a new baby, you know, that needs lots of attention and demand, and is demanding, and then of course you don't have time for all the other things, you know, that you want to do. So there I am, listening to people often on. I've got a velvet chaise longue now. It's not a stretcher anymore, and it's anyway, it's there, she said, pointing at it. But they and so I listen to people, and, you know, and I wisely say, you know, go out into the countryside and take some time, and, you know, and of course I'm not doing it myself, you know, that's absolutely terrible, isn't it? But I will
eventually.
Balance is the thing I'm looking for, but I haven't got it at the moment.
I'm just going to read a couple of things out of the chat, if we may, because I thought two of the things that have come up are really interesting. One's from Sophie, who says, it's not quite poetry, but I've been printing out pieces of my life writing work for my nan to read while she's in the hospice. So I am sorry. Not that they're good or anything, but I would agree.
Wait, can I say?
I bet they are good, if that is Sophie, I know.
As someone who has read them, I can say, yes, Sophie, they are good.
How lovely, how lovely. But I suppose that it's about this connection, isn't it? And almost kind of keeping people in touch with people's lives and what touches them and all those emotions that we kind of go through. And Jack is saying here, poetry is like the crystallization of literature. That's lovely, and I'm going to rob that. Wasn't it Strunk? He said, a work of literature should have no extra words for the same reason a machine has no extra cogs or a drawing has no unnecessary lines. That's rather beautiful.
Lovely. Yeah.
I feel like I'm not going to say anything because it'll just distill take away the beauty of that. That is lovely. Poetry has saved my life. Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's lovely to know. That's lovely to know. So Deb, tell us about this poetry pharmacy, because the ambulance is parked up, not quite parked up.
I sold it.
Oh, you never? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know.
Does that mean somebody else is out there as the emergency poet?
It's gone to Cyprus, bizarrely. I don't know what it's doing in Cyprus. No, nobody else is doing it. I did something recently for the BBC Strong Language Festival and did a pop-up, called it pop-up poetry pharmacy there. So I was on the road a bit, but this is very demanding. And I was realising the ambulance was sitting there rusting away. So we sold it and we bought a camper van. So I got the camper van in the end.
Oh, lovely.
The poetry pharmacies, it is an odd place. You've been here, Lisa, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I think it's fabulous. Yeah, so I've moved in, really.
You're welcome. But yeah, it's a mad idea at a time where there was a kind of received wisdom that poetry books don't sell, that there's the death of the high street, and in the middle of all of that, I've opened a poetry bookshop, really, in the middle of nowhere on the high street, in the middle of nowhere, on the Welsh Shropshire borders, and it's what is it? People describe it as a shop, or I describe it as a third space. I don't know if you've heard of that expression. And I think some psychologists said that we all need a first space, which is home, second space, which is a workspace generally, and the third space are places like pubs and libraries, cafes, places where you choose to go, that are social settings. And so I describe it in that way. And it's an old ironmonger. It's a Victorian ironmonger shop with all its original fittings, a big counter, an old till, and I also would say it was a kind of therapy of nostalgia or slowness coming here as well. So there's a coffee shop with good cakes, good coffee. People are invited to hang around. There's no high turnover in the coffee shop. And then there's my poetry in pills for different emotional ailments. There's a consulting room. There's upstairs, we've got a workshop space, a poetry reference library behind me. People come up here and write, and book launches and open mics. And then there's the bookshop downstairs, which unusually is classified by stages of life and emotional states rather than the typical A to Z. And it's not just poetry, it's books on psychology, philosophy, nature, well-being. So the whole place has that kind of focus. So you can, if you've had grief, there's a section on grief, there's a section on motherhood and friendship, gratitude. It's quite odd, really.
No, it's not. I mean, I thought that was the perfect way of doing it, though. I mean, people are saying it's amazing, it's a wonderland. I see Jenny Hopes here and saying it's magical. And but the way that I mean, I think I remember when I came and I said to you, I love the way you've ordered the books. I just think what a great way of doing it, because it just adds to this whole idea that when you're in there, it's almost like an emotional experience. Do you know what I mean? It's you're kind of, you're drawn to different knickknacks. You know, I'm very much like you, Deb. I love all those trinkets and knickknacks, and you know, I'm a sucker for the old Penguin books and things like that I know that you have. But then you start to kind of feel compelled to go to certain sections, and it's almost as if, yeah, that is how I wouldn't mind having a look to see what's there.
Yeah.
And did you always know you were going to do it like that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, when we saw this place, I think it from making an offer on the building inspired the idea. And then from making an offer, it took about 2 years from making the offer to actually moving in, and then about 5 months to opening up. And I had kind of those 2 years to think and plan it. So yeah, I did know I was going to do that, and it works. Poetry sells because people know I'm helping them find it. You know, otherwise it's just spine on and they're lost, aren't they? And you have to know what you're looking for. That's not true of any other genre in a bookshop. You know, you get help from the bookseller. So I'm doing that work for them. So Liz Berry, on motherhood is in a section on mothers. It's not in A to Z with Liz Berry. People come across it, and they'll.
But I think that's a wonderful way of actually, if you're new to poetry, it's a wonderful way of that introduction to it, because you're not kind of like phased by, oh gosh, A to B and I don't know where to, do you know what I mean? Or because I think people when they're new to poetry will just aim straight for a collection or or an anthology in particular, but to actually have those categorizations I think is so useful. One thing I'm going to ask you about, Deb, is social media, because social media, I think, for me personally, it's the bane of my life. I'm not very good at it, and I rarely engage with it, and I should do more of it. And my publishers are always going on at me about how little I do. It is the place where we meet. It is the place that provides information. It is the place where we promote and we brag and we talk about our successes and our failures. But at the same way, it does our head in. However, and we hear all these horror stories about how, the whole toxic environment, particularly of Twitter, and how we kind of use our social media platforms and how it does affect our well-being. And so I just wondered if you'd got any advice on how you use social media platforms, because I've noticed that you use them very well. And also you did a little crowdfunding, didn't you, as well, to help with the Poetry Pharmacy?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I suppose I've got this kind of hippie attitude to the whole thing, or kind of small example of, for me, it's a kind of socialism thing, or I don't know what I'm talking about now, but what I kind of think that you have to give and give and give and be supportive and be the reader of other people, to be interested in other people, and to do that first. And I think you have to do that first and a lot before you can ask anything of it, if that makes sense. And I think if you're doing the self-promotion, I have somebody who keeps saying, please share this, please share that, and I kind of go, well, you need to do it as well, have a look at your own social media feed and see if you're supporting other people as well as promoting yourself. So I kind of think there's that, there's that wisdom, isn't there, about put things out there that people are interested in reading. And I think people have been interested in following the development of Poetry Pharmacy, so there's that. But yeah, I think it's kind of what you put out there is what you're likely to get back, and that I quite like Instagram now. This is quite a photogenic building. Instagram is much less toxic than other places. You know, it's kind of pretty picture land, and
yeah,
find the place that suits you, I suppose.
yeah. I that's what I've always kind of said. And we had Lena Normington a couple of years ago, who is quite a big social media influencer in the publishing world, and she said, find your platform and stick with it. And really, you know, sort of find a community and really kind of treat that community as if they live next door. And, you know, keep them involved in what you're doing, but also, as you say, yes, click like, be bothered to do that and to interact. And it's and what about sort of podcasting and things like that? I mean, Ines here is a podcaster. You know, it's what she loves to do, and it's all about the kind of interviewing of people. Is it something that you think the Poetry Pharmacy will move into one day, to kind of keep that awareness and reach more people who can't get to Bishop's Castle?
Yeah, well, I love podcasts. I really enjoy listening to podcasts, and for me, you know, I do it, and they tend to be political or psychology or something, you know, separate from this. You know, my terrible problem is that this place has all sorts of potential in all sorts of places, and it's honestly, I haven't got money to I have to go and wash up, you know, and in the morning I have to clean the toilet, do the hoovering, get the cakes out, order the coffee. I literally haven't got time. I'm working on editing a book for somebody, and I've been mentoring somebody else for a publisher, and I just can't do it all. I'd like to, but I'd love to do podcasts, but I haven't got time.
I think it's so telling that you've just rattled off all of those various jobs, from editing through to cleaning the toilet, because all of them very important on the daily. But do you know, years ago someone used the term portfolio career to me, and I'd never heard it before, but I slowly started to realise that that's actually a writer's life.
Yeah.
You don't do one thing, you do like 32 of them. And
you do so much of that, Charlie, don't you?
Well, not in comparison, really, Deb. Do you know, earlier you made a comment about setting up the Emergency Poet initially, and I actually wrote it down because you said that it felt like it was a project that was too big for me. And when you said it, I wrote it down because I thought, isn't that everything that we do? Do you know, we go into it thinking this is going to take a lot of time, or this is going to take a lot of energy, or even sometimes you go into it thinking this is never going to take off, but you throw yourself into it anyway. And I think there's this misconception that if you're a writer, you're just a writer, whereas actually you are 100 other things, including editor, mentor, toilet cleaner, dog walker, child wrangler, all the rest of it kind of rolled into one.
Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? You know, that you have to, that I don't know anybody very few people who make a living at just doing their writing without having to teach or do, you know, all sorts of things around it. And we're lucky, you know, it's a nice world to be in. It's really generally supportive, and you know, I think it's a really lovely work. But yeah, you have to be you have to keep looking for the next thing, don't you? That kind of self-employed income stream is quite scary as well.
Years ago, someone told me that being anything in the creative industry meant working out what your slash was going to be. So are you a writer / editor, or a writer / teacher, or a writer / umpteen other things? And that's kind of stuck with me as something that I try and tell people. And you are an amazing example of that, given the kind of like the entrepreneurial aspects of just what you've done and what you do, because really you're like writer / businesswoman, actually.
I know that's really weird, you know. You have to be, if you do open a shop and a cafe, but when I didn't come at it from that direction. I came at it from an arts kind of perspective, and then I've kind of other people kind of talk about your business, and I suddenly think, oh my God, I've got a business. I don't really see myself in that way, but anyway. But I must be.
I don't know. I would say you definitely are.
Yeah, I do I also think it's quite good to have a project in mind that's too big for you. I quite like that, because you just need to start making tiny little steps in that direction. And it I never thought that I'd end up being an editor, but you take 2 steps and you end up, it all came back to probably I ended up doing a degree, an MA, doing the work as as a writer, because I got a job as a dinner lady in a primary school, and it goes right back to being a dinner lady. I got a job as a TA, then as a TA they got me to be the language specialist, and then and off you go. But if I wouldn't have got here if I hadn't got the dinner lady job. So it comes back to that, and it's really useful because I've got a certificate in food health and safety already for the cafe. That's really handy.
So you weren't like ready to go straight from the off, really, Deb, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I didn't know what I was doing with a cafe either. I never had a cafe. It's just I think it's just good to have a go, isn't it? And see where you end up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, kind of like inspired by all this talk about the portfolio career. Like I also have a portfolio career, like Lisa was saying. I freelance on the side, I do my podcast, my writing, the teaching at uni. But I wanted to ask, you have any advice about burnout? Because I feel like that's the downfall of all of us artists. First of all, because we love doing way too many projects at the same time, or at least I do. Every time someone mentions something exciting, I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
And also because some people, I don't know, like I feel they take advantage of us in that, like we're asked to do a lot of things for free, which sometimes are great. I'm all about, volunteering or doing things for free, but like at the same time, we also have to eat. And I feel and pay rent and those things, those boring things in life. But yeah, and I found myself at different points in my life, just struggling with burnout. And I just wondered if any advice, any poem you can recommend.
Yes.
Someone suffering that at the moment.
Ines, it's such a good question, that, because when we opened on National Poetry Day 2 years ago. So we've been open 2 years, and the first 6 months we had BBC filming here and Channel 4 News. Wow. And it was extraordinarily, we had loads of attention, and I was exhausted, and I didn't know it until really recently that I kind of thought, oh yeah, I officially had burnout. I had it. You kind of just keep going, and then the first lockdown happened, I think, in March, and honestly, for me, it was such a relief and a kind of time to take stock and take a breath, and it was only this last summer with the cafe open again and the shop open again, and I was doing an event every week, which I'm still doing, that I realized I had this horrible feeling. I thought, oh my God, I'm feeling burnt out again, and it's reminding me of that time. So even though I loved it and it was wonderful, it was also too much for me. And I'm quite an old lady, and I sit there advising people on how to take some time out and look after yourself, and I wasn't doing it myself. And there is a poem I would advise somebody to read a poem by Seamus Heaney called Postscript, he goes out, there's a calm lake on one side and a rough sea on the other, and he's somewhere in between in a kind of limbo-like space. And I think the first line of the poem is, and some time make the time. And so that's key, you must take that time for yourself, and you must find a place of in between, or boredom, or nowhere, or limbo, because in that place, that's where the creative or the inspiration comes in. And you could call it boredom as even, but I think the importance of boredom is very underestimated. And so, yeah, that poem.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was really inspiring.
There's a question here to say, do you think poetry has peaked? But it's no. no, because I mean, I don't know about you, Deb, but I think there's generations of poets to come. I think that's the point, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's an art form like any other art, and poetry, how odd, isn't it, that we ask this question about poetry over and over, has it had its day, or, it's just for the academy. There's a need in people, with children like nursery rhymes and song, and we turn to poetry at weddings and funerals, that it's the thing that we can all understand and we can all do without much trouble. And so, no, it will always be there. And I think what I'm trying to do as well is to bring it out of the academy more and more, and to put it into the hands of the general reader. So no, I don't think it's seen its peak by any means.
It's so Sophie is asking, where would be a good place to find such poetry? I'm the type to struggle to find time to sit down and read what I really should. I love to find poetry that speaks to me a bit more, as you've spoken about.
That's a really nice question. I always say to people, get a good poetry anthology, and I can recommend several, and leave it in the place where you stop for a minute. So you could leave it in the loo. That's a good place for poetry. But there's a Wendy Cope anthology, A Poem a Day. That's really good. Read one a day, every day of the year. And then leave it where you have a cup of tea, so that kind of coffee table book, or by the chair where you sit in the garden, or by a window and look out, and don't you can't read. I don't think you should read either a collection or an anthology as though you were reading a book. I think you need to dip in on one or two, because it's condensed, it's rich and difficult to not difficult to read or understand, but you're taking on quite a lot. So don't read a lot, just keep dipping in, I think.
I'm all about the routine. But I think that's the whole point, though, isn't it, really? I mean, I don't know about you. I suppose in a way we have to be slightly routine, don't we, as writers? And I think there is something in that routine that helps with the sense of well-being that we have. Do you know what I mean? I know, Ines, you've been doing an early morning writing group, haven't you? I did it once. But then I have a young child. But how have you, I mean, you've said it's been really empowering doing it at 6
it's been
o'clock
wonderful.
in the morning.
It's at 5:55 a.m., which I know is not for everyone. And the irony is that this is set up by Yvonne Battle-Felton. She's also a writer and a friend of mine, who used to laugh at me because I used to wake up at 5 a.m. to write before work. And now she's discovered the power of it, because it's just that idea of making your writing the most important thing. So giving your writing the best energy, which is just when you wake up. And also when you wake up, and this is advice for everyone, or at least it works for me, because you are half asleep. You are not as critical with yourself. You know what I mean? Like, you just really just enjoy the process, and you are not overthinking it, or I don't know. I am a bit of an overthinker and a perfectionist, and I find that first hour after I wake up very fruitful and fun. Also, by the way, we have a question here in the Q&A that I don't know if you've seen in the Q&A section.
Have I missed it? Oh, sorry, Ines. Yes, read it by all means.
Yeah, so we have a question here by Max, who says, Deb, you mentioned that you see the pharmacy as being a third space for people, which for someone who works in a tea room, I can completely understand. My question, though, is how do you marry, if you do, that responsibility of being a self for people with also trying to run the business?
Oh, wow, that's a great
Yeah.
question. Yeah, that's a really good question, because people come in. I mean, it's part of what I love as well. People come in and they'll not yesterday, a couple of days ago, one after the other, I had one woman whose husband had just died, and she wanted a book, but she wanted to talk. And then the customer after her husband had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And there's something about this place that invites those conversations. People open up and talk about difficult things. And yeah, I have loads of emails, so I have to, I have this tension of thinking I need to leave but that comes first. I don't rush away from that. I do emails if I can. And I think the whole running the business thing, I think I'm not that good at it. I just make it up as I go along, and that it's less important. And my prime motive for doing this work is not to, it'd be nice if it made me some money and made a living, but that's not why I do it. I do it because, I live here as well, behind and above the place, and it's a nice life. It's a life of interesting conversations, and it's a writerly life, and I feel really lucky. I have to learn to get better at things. I do a lot, and I spread too thinly, and nothing very well, really, but at least I have a go.
Well, I completely disagree with you, Deb. I think you do it incredibly well, and I think you're incredibly inspiring to a lot of us for your entrepreneurialness. I can't get the word out now.
You're a writer. You should have the word.
I know. I should. But we are kind of coming towards the end, and running out of time. And I wondered if, before we closed, do you have a kind of poem settlement recommendation for everybody as we, head first into the Christmas, the Christmas holidays?
Oh, that put me on the spot.
One from thin air.
I haven't got it to hand, but there's a poem that I really love called Distances by French poet, but in translation, Philippe Jacotet. And it talks about, it's a beautiful sort of wintry poem of the bird and light and passing the light from hand to hand. Anyway, look it up.
Lovely.
That's my little prescription to close this.
Yeah.
Have to look it up.
Oh, well, thank you honestly, Deb, thank you very much. It's been so lovely to talk to you, so lovely to catch up, but also just to hear about everything that you do. But also, I think you've given everybody lots of great advice, just in terms of keeping their heads above water, keeping sane, and think, we should reach for a poem, and we should, think about what we're writing about, and that we're all managing all these different heads, aren't we, and strands and roles. But that's the beauty of the creative industries. And that's why we all do it, because no day is the same. So thank you very much to everybody who has joined us this evening. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Deb, thank you again. Charlie, Innes, thank you too. And wishing everybody a very Merry Christmas and all the best for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Innes.